In all honesty, I had no business being at the club then. First off, it was a Tuesday night. Studio 97 was one of the only places that was open on the weeknights. Secondly, I had work early the next morning. I should have been at home in bed. Thirdly, I had just broken up with my boyfriend of over a year a few days prior. Studio 97 was the ideal place for me to lose my head and pick up someone I would regret in the morning. And lastly, I was alone. It's not a good idea to get drunk and put yourself at the mercy of your fellow clubgoers without having a friend to either snap you out of it or back you up. Needless to say, it was a recipe for disaster. In the minutes leading up to it, I actually wasn't that drunk. I had about 3 or 4 drinks. Tipsy, but definitely not falling over. The floor wasn't that full. It was a Tuesday after all, but it had substantially more people on it than I would have guessed. The songs began to turn over from harder techno to more subdued synth pop. Most of the dancers took this time to leave the floor and get drinks, regroup with friends, or use the bathroom. I took the third option. Pushing open the door, I stepped inside. It was lit only by a strip of red lights running over the top of the mirror, casting the whole room in a crimson glow. The metal was all a shiny chrome that reflected the lights. It smelled better than a club restroom usually did and seemed to be deserted. I did my business, washed my hands, and turned to leave. Just as I put my hand out, I heard the doors to one of the stalls creak open behind me. It wasn't the normal sound of someone just opening it and stepping out. It was a slow, creaking noise, like a door squeaking open in an old haunted house movie. Against my better judgment, I turned around. The red lights darkened the room significantly, making it difficult to see who or what was in the stall. Just when I thought about leaving, I saw a girl step out. She was rubbing her nose with the back of her hand and snuffling loudly. Dressed in a skimpy black dress and high heels about 2 inches too tall, she was mumbling under her breath. Need more. Got to find him. Need more. She walked over to the sink and absent-mindedly ran her hands under the water. At last, she seemed to notice me and looked up, giving me a bleary-eyed stare. Do you work for him? Can you hook me up? I stared back, struggling to form words. No? Who are you talking about? Instead of answering, she abruptly turned off the faucet and darted towards the door, shoving me aside and running back into the club. It swung shut behind her, leaving the bathroom in its crimson darkness. The stall was still open. Curiosity overtook me. I crossed the room and grabbed the door, pulling it wider and peering into the cramped space. My stomach dropped. He was perched upon the seat, almost human, but not quite. At first glance, I thought that the abyss of black feathers was the suit, but as I stared at it, it became eerily clear that something was very wrong. Something about his shape, or perhaps the way his eyes were set into his face, was amiss and inhuman. His head twitched and tilted to one side, like a curious dog waiting for instruction. My legs wanted to stumble away or crumble beneath me, but my mind held them firmly in place. Nice suit, I whispered, trembling. You too, the thing replied. He unfurled his leg from the top of the lid and onto the stained tiles. Standing straight, he was almost 8 feet tall, and felt every bit of it. As he moved towards me, I swung myself aside to avoid him. Despite my maneuver, his arm still found its way onto my shoulder for a momentary pat. It felt like he meant to reassure me, but instead it only sent a spasm down my spine. The red strips that lit the room flickered. I could have sworn the room didn't look quite this dismal when I entered. The thing ducked out of the door, and I watched the door swing to a close. Then I noticed out of the corner of my eye something creeping out from the stall next to me. It was blooming outwards towards my shoes, and even in the red light I could tell what it was. So vividly crimson. I screamed and fled, slamming through the bathroom door and stumbling out. The music had stopped, but the light still spun and flashed, displaying the horror of the dance floor in a strobe. Piles and piles of club-goers, strewn this way and that. Each one looked more gored and wretched than the last. I heard the familiar cry of a crow as the stench hit my nose. "Are you okay?" came the voice, like a shy child. There he was, sat comfortably across a speaker on the stage, a murder of crows perched all around him. I struggled for words, but couldn't find any. Instead, I looked back to the strewn corpses, now seeing the hordes of crows that pecked at each and every one. "Oh, them? Well, they're only dead for now." I heard the slight British twang to the skin-crawling voice that issued forth from his beak. "What are you talking about?" "Well, don't worry. I've only done this so we can play a game. What would you like to play?" I struggled for words, but found none. "It's a simple game. When we're done, you can go back. You might even be able to go back with more than you came, if you play correctly." A crow somewhere amid the dance floor cawed and flapped its way over, landing upon the thing's outstretched hand. "The girl before you gambled a little more than she could pay. But you're going to play a much more interesting game. I can already tell. The rules are simple, so I hope you're listening. First, you tell me something that you want. Then, I'll tell you something that I want. And, if you do what I want, I'll make sure what you want happens. Oh, and if you don't do it, or if you tell anybody about our little game..." His head tilted backwards, turned around to look at something on the dance floor. He didn't have to say what would happen to me. He was looking at the body of a dead club-goer on the floor. That dress. It was the girl from earlier, the one from the bathroom. A crow was picking out one of her eyes with its beak. The Birdman chuckled with a child's laughter, coming from behind me. This can't be for real, right? No, he could actually... No. I don't know what to say. I just want to go home. Oh, I don't think you'd like doing what I want you to, just for that. Maybe Eric? I thought. Could I go back? No, I need to get out of here. Can't I just leave? The crows around us began making a terrible noise. He spun his head in place for a moment, before they quieted down. Then how would I get what I want? He had a needy quality to his voice, like a child being denied his plaything. Tell me what you want, and it'll be all over by sunrise. All or nothing, I guessed. I want to go back a week. No, not that. A month. To before I saw Eric at that party. I want to go back to before I had the fight with Josh. Can you do that? Sure, honey. His voice jerked, almost like he was about to squawk. I just want you to... His head did that weird turning thing again. I realized he was scanning the room for something. First, he zeroed in on a dead dancer, an older Middle Eastern man. But then he just zoomed past it and ran to some dead businessman with a suitcase. He pranced towards it, picked it up, and opened it on the floor with a ransacker's glee. A collection of men's and women's erotica magazines poured out. He didn't seem to show any interest in them. All he wanted was the case. He ran back and laid the case beside him. His beak made it the full 8 feet of his height down as he pecked at the dead man's exposed stomach, and he spilled guts and viscera into the suitcase before closing it. Here, he held it by the handle. Take it. It was wet and dripping on the outside as I held it. Bits and pieces of the dead man clung to the leather exterior. My face was a mix of tears and convulsions from holding back vomit. There's a hostel across the street. I want you to put this case in room 66G. I just want to die. His voice began screeching again. That's not what you said you wanted from me. Don't make me angry. You've got until sunrise, all right? What is that, 92 minutes from now? Just get going. He turned away from me, running over back to the Middle Eastern man. As he began pecking at him again, the big neon signs all over the club began to change. Studio 97 became Studio 92, and as I stood there mesmerized for a moment, it turned into Studio 91. Oh, crap. I held the suitcase tight as I ran out into the dreary streets. I was quite familiar with the hotel he asked me to go to. How did he know all of this about me? The many escapades I'd had there with Eric, and what sort of game had I walked into? I found my heart beating faster as I stepped into the lobby. It seemed colder and darker than I ever remembered it being. The clerk was busy checking another guest in, so I slipped by to the elevator. Something caused the elevator to rock side to side as I rode up to the floor. When I reached the room in question, the dripping suitcase clutched tightly to my body. The door was already open, as though someone was expecting me. As I stepped inside the room, a foul odor overcame my senses. The carpet seemed to move and sway before my eyes as I looked at the lone occupant on the queen bed. It had the face of a man, but besides that, nothing about it resembled a human. Its neck was craning out like a giraffe, and its body almost resembled that of a slug, with long pools of slime dripping from its body. It had no arms or legs to speak of, just a gelatinous naked form writhing on the bed. A worm. It was a giant freaking worm. I scrambled to leave the room, but found the door no longer there. Another gift. One will cut cologne. Its voice sounded hollow as it took it from my arms and swallowed it in one ferocious gulp. Its wide eyes probed me as more saliva dropped into the infested carpet, 1,000 tiny larvae squirming about. Run along, little one, it said as I saw the door reappear before my eyes. As I walked briskly through the dark, twisting streets back towards the club, I saw now that it was 64. Happy late-night bar crawlers walked past me. Many of them gave me dirty looks or moved away, understandably. My shoes and dress were stained with gore, and my face was probably a mess of run makeup and mascara. I could have been a drugged-up prostitute or an escaped mental patient. Great public image. My feet reached the road. Across from me sat the studio, only a short distance away, but to me like another world. Hard techno music had started back up again, and I saw the faint flashing of lights coming from the doorway. I could have ended it all here, turned back around and pretended like all this shit never happened, ran a hotel, gotten a better job, maybe even gotten into a good, decent relationship that wasn't built on lies. My feet stepped onto the road. No turning back now. I pushed open the glass doors reluctantly. A blast of stench and warm air hit me in the face like a wall. The floor was a mural of blood and guts. They had been arranged into a gory recreation of my face. It may have been made from the insides of 24 people, but there's no doubting that it was me. I stumbled backwards and vomited violently onto the floor. My eyes drifted upwards to see something even more terrible. The Birdman, or Kutka, whatever he was called. He had piled up the bodies and was sitting on them glamorously like some sort of king. Crows littered the pile and flew around him in a cloud. He squawked and flapped his feather-winged arms together. "So, you delivered the case?" I nodded, trying not to let the tears gathering at the edges of my eyes free. Then I remembered his side of the bargain. "So, you'll send me back? To before it all happened? To before the party? To before... Yeah. He vomited up a chunk of bloody meat. "Yes, I am a bird of my word." He began to giggle at that statement. So how does this work? Do I run really fast or make a wish? The Birdman squawked in what sounds like laughter. "No, nothing like that. Just stand still and think about the exact date you want to go back to." I thought about a date. Exactly 1 week before the party. Before everything happened. "I'm ready,"